All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining.
All right.
As we have people coming in, please feel free to drop your name and where you are watching from this evening in the chat. We'd love to see where all of our members are. And we'll get going in just a minute or two as we still have folks entering the webinar, and we will be recording this as well.
We will work on the tech issue with the chat. Thanks for flagging that. Everybody will get to work on fixing that.
I think we may have fixed that. I think we got it. There we go. All right, people are adding their names and where they're from. Welcome, everybody. We will get started soon. We are recording this, and we will have some folks coming along here. We'll give it another minute or so. And again, it's being recorded. Please drop your name and where you're watching from this evening in the chat. And thank you all so much for being here. All right, it looks like we have critical mass. Patrick?
Certainly. Thank you very much, Katie, and thank you all for joining us here this evening. My name is Patrick McDonnell. I'm the new president and CEO of PennFuture, based out of Harrisburg, but with offices all across the Commonwealth. We are focused on clean air, clean water, clean energy for all Pennsylvanians. And this is definitely one of those important conversations in helping us advance the ball on all of those things. Obviously, there have been a lot of accomplishments over the last couple of years, most recently with significant money in last year's budget for clean water. But there's still a lot of work left to do, be it on climate, or be it to deliver on the promise of our environmental rights amendment, clean air, pure water for all Pennsylvanians. And in particular, keeping that focus on all Pennsylvanians, making sure we are delivering environmental benefits to communities that have been left out of the clean energy revolution or that have suffered the burden over decades of air pollution and water pollution. Very, very excited to engage in this conversation tonight with my colleagues at Conservation Voters of Pennsylvania. Obviously, critically important for us on engagement is how we work with our elected officials in the governor's office and in our legislature. So looking forward to hearing more about that as the evening progresses. I'll stop there and I'll turn it over to Molly Parson, Executive Director at Conservation Voters of PA.
Hello, thank you so much, Patrick. And I just want to say that we're so excited to have Patrick on board. He was just saying that he is about a month into the job now, and it's been quite an exciting month to start this important work. My name is Molly Parson. I am the Executive Director at Conservation Voters of Pennsylvania. I have a bunch of slides that I'm going to share with you. So Kaylee, if we could get those up on the screen. I am going to talk to you a little bit about what we're all here to hear, which is what happened on Election Day. Kaylee, you can advance to the first slide. So what happened is that we won. And not only did we win, let's get a round of applause for that all across the state. Not only did we win, but we won in a really significant way. Not just at the top of the ticket, but up and down the ballot, we won on behalf of climate and environmental champions. So yes, please put your celebratory remarks in the chat. I'm thrilled. So, you know, what exactly did we win? We won at the top of the ticket. We elected John Fetterman as the next United States Senator from Pennsylvania. That was key, as you all, I'm sure, are aware, in helping us retain the Senate majority down in Washington, D.C. And while we wait on those returns from Georgia, from the runoff, winning this seat in Pennsylvania here put us in a strong position to not have to rely on those results in order to maintain the majority. Absolutely huge. And we won in the governor's race. We elected Josh Shapiro and his running mate Austin Davis as our next governor and lieutenant governor. This race has always been the absolute must win for us and for the rest of the environmental community this cycle. Maintaining a pro-environment governor was an absolutely do or die moment for us. And I'm so thrilled that we elected Josh Shapiro, who I think is going to be a fantastic, fantastic governor. We also reelected all of our environmental champions to the state Senate, and we even flipped one seat there. That was a bit of a tougher fight because of redistricting, but really excited to be returning all of our pro-environmental champions who are up for reelection to the state Senate. And in the US House and the Senate, I also want to highlight before we talk about the really big exciting news in the State House. In the United States House and Senate, we, as I said, have a slim majority in the US Senate. The House is still to be decided as of last I checked. We re-elected all of our congressional champions in our pro-environment congressional champions in Pennsylvania, including some particularly tough fights for Matt Cartwright and Susan Wild, who ran really fantastic races and have been such great climate champions throughout the last few years. And we also have an amazing new win to celebrate. We elected State House environmental champion Summer Lee, who has been one of our movement's close friends for so long. We elected her to be the first Black woman member of Congress from Pennsylvania to represent a district out in Allegheny County. And I am just so thrilled that she's going to be going to Pennsylvania, going down to DC, representing her state. So the big news, I think, that everybody wants to talk about is what happened with the Pennsylvania State House. And Kaylee, you can go to the next slide, please. This was the big upset. And as of right now, I believe that folks are beginning to say officially that Democrats have, for the first time since 2010, taken control of the State House. This is absolutely huge. And I'll talk a little bit more in depth about this, but I do not think that anybody was really expecting this to be possible this year. I think that we thought maybe a couple of cycles from now, we can make enough gains to take the State House back. But we were so incredibly successful this election cycle that we did it in one. Now, to dive into the details a little bit, thanks to redistricting, the battleground for the State House, the amount of seats that were in contention and were going to be very close races was a lot bigger, was much bigger this year. And we didn't expect to win in as many places as we did. However, in fact, we flipped 11 battleground seats from having anti-environment legislators holding those seats to being held by a pro-environment legislator. That work helped us flip the balance of control in the state house. You'll see this map here. This chart here represents the balance of power currently right now as of 2022. My God, sorry. There were 90 Democrats and 113 Republicans. And if we go to the next slide, we will see the balance of power as it is now. We have 2 races that are still outstanding and still have yet to be called that we're tracking very closely as they count the final votes there. But we feel very safe in saying we have 101 seats right now, Democrats to Republicans with 100 seats. We need 102 to hold the majority. There is a race in Montgomery County in House District 151 that I believe at this point this evening has been called for the Democratic candidate, Missy Serrato. And then we have one final seat that is very close, and they're counting those final provisional and overseas absentee ballots in Bucks County in HD 142. This, I cannot emphasize enough, is an absolute game changer. This is so exciting. It has been over 12 years since we have since Democrats have been in control in either the state house or the state senate. And this gives us a tremendous opportunity to advance so many of the priorities that all of us have been working on. We have been playing defense for a long time, as so many of you know, and this gives us our first opportunity in a while to be able to go on the offensive. Next slide. So what happened statewide? Let's take a look at the initial statewide results. The first thing I want to highlight about this is that I think a lot of you are feeling the same way I'm feeling, which is a little bit surprised. I think the pundits and the news has been telling us all year that we should have seen a red wave. All the polling we saw showed increasingly close margins for both the Senate race and the governor's race. And, you know, common political knowledge told us that in a year with a challenging economic climate, in a year where the sitting president has low approval ratings, to expect the other party, the Republican Party, to make a lot of gains. And we did not see that to be the case. And so I think that it's going to be really interesting to find out why exactly that happened. Now, we have some top line numbers that I'm going to share with you now about how many people voted and how they voted. However, we won't know exactly who voted down to the person until early next year. That information takes a while to get uploaded into the voter rolls. And at that point, we'll have a lot more info that will help us determine some of those larger trends that we like to think about. Exactly who came out to vote. Was it Gen Z that really came out in strong force for Democrats and held back that red wave? We'll be able to tell more of what actually happened a couple months from now. But for now, let's talk about what we do now. What we do now is that we won both of the top of the ticket races. I think there's a couple of reasons for this. We had a couple of reasons that we can point to, none of which should surprise anybody on this call, but I think we can talk a lot about the relative strength of the candidates that were running in these top of the ticket races. We had Josh Shapiro as a particularly strong candidate for governor. He had been coalescing support for that race for years. He had a strong record on both environmental issues and other issues in his time as Attorney General. And he built a really broad and successful coalition of voters. He had more money, he had kind of more success in any measure, any metric that you can measure than his opponent. And then you look at the other race and you look at John Fetterman. And, one thing I like to point out about this race is that John Fetterman built a really unique coalition of voters all across the state. He visited every single county multiple times, and you had his unique Pennsylvania-ness had an exact foil in Dr. Oz's kind of unique New Jersey-ness and celebrity and non-Pennsylvania-ness. And so I think that there were some really strong candidate contrasts that led to the results that we saw. I think we also saw that people recognize that Democrats are getting stuff done. And I think this is particularly true on the environment. We have been talking a lot on the doors and with voters about the historic investments from the Inflation Reduction Act coming out of Washington, as well as the investments in Governor Wolf's most recent state budget for conservation funding. These are huge wins that have been delivered by the Biden administration and by the Wolf administration. And I think those translated into votes. I think you also obviously cannot deny the kind of dual importance of the impact of the Dobbs decision and of Roe v. Wade in this election, as well as the impact of election denialism and the backlash against that. In states where abortion and democracy were under threat, like Pennsylvania, where we had the Republican-led legislature threatening to overturn election results and ban abortion, Democrats did tend to do better where those threats were felt more acutely, like in Pennsylvania. You'll also see in these statewide results that Josh Shapiro did outperform John Fetterman. This was expected, kind of based on largely Josh Shapiro's previous success in statewide elections. We saw him in his last two elections statewide get more votes than even presidential nominees at the top of the ticket. So he's a very successful statewide candidate, and you'll see that reflected in the results here. We can go to the next slide. We'll talk a little bit about some of the trends that we see. So these next two slides show the election day voter returns versus the mail-in voter returns. And you'll see here that Republicans largely got a bigger share of the votes that were cast in person on election day. I don't think that should surprise anyone. We kind of know that to be the case, that Democratic voters tend to be more open to mail-in voting. And if you go to the next slide, you can see that borne out in the results that between 78 and 83% of the voters who requested mail-in ballots were ultimately Democratic voters. You can see this play out on election night when the returns start coming in and early races look like they're being heavily, Republican. The Republicans are leading, and then once they start tabulating those mail-in votes, you see that swing to the left. We go to the next slide. We'll talk a little bit about turnout. So the good news is that this was a great election for turnout. People were really engaged, and I think that there were a lot of concerns going into this race about whether or not people were going to feel motivated to come out to the polls. Statewide turnout continues to increase year over year. You can see in the midterm years are in blue, 2014, 18, and 2022. We increased by almost a point over the turnout in 2018. And we had historically high turnout in 2022, which was an increase over 2016. So that's really exciting to see that the work that we're all doing on the ground to cultivate people to be more civically engaged, it's working. More people are turning out to vote. We also achieved an 87.5% return rate for mail-in ballots. That means that of the people that requested mail-in ballots, 87% returned them. That's a really amazing figure to me. And I think that tells me the importance of continuing to lean into convincing voters to vote by mail. This is going to be really key for future programming. The more pro-environment voters we can get to sign up to vote by mail, the more likely they are to turn into consistent every election voters when they get that ballot in the mail. So let's go to the next slide now that we've talked a little bit about the results and the turnout. I would be remiss if I didn't brag a little bit about how we got there and the important role that our organization and our partners played in securing this victory. So we ran the biggest independent expenditure and electoral expense that we've ever done. It was by a factor of 3. We spent more money, we invested in more tactics, we did more on the ground work than we have ever done. We partnered with our national organization in DC, the Legal Conservation Voters, to do work on the Senate race, the governor's race, and some targeted state house battleground races, most notably Paul Friel's race, who's joined us here for a panel in Chester County, as well as a handful of races in state house races in Bucks County as well. As you can see on the screen, we sent over 700,000 pieces of mail. We ran digital ads across the state that had over 17 million impressions. For the first time ever, we actually ran a television ad, which was really exciting for me. You go to the next slide, you'll see that we did a lot more direct voter outreach. We sent 150,000 text messages. Our phenomenal team of staff and volunteer phone bankers made 385,000 phone calls. I know some of you are on the Zoom today. It's absolutely tremendous work that you guys did. And perhaps most significantly, we went back on the doors for the first time since the pandemic. We made 267,000 door knocks, talking to tens of thousands of voters in critical areas, and having those really important face-to-face conversations that we've been missing out during the pandemic. And I can't emphasize how important and impactful that work out in the field, door knocking, has been. So I'm so proud of this work that we've done. And I just want to, before I turn it over to this panel to talk about what all this means for environmental issues, the issues you all care about, I just want to thank you all so much. It's because of the folks on this call, the donors, the members, the people who picked up the phone to text bank to phone bank, anybody who knocked on a door or had a house party for a candidate, and honestly, anybody who got out and voted for pro-environment candidates. It is thanks to you that we're able to celebrate these absolutely tremendous wins that we're going to turn into some real policy solutions and progress on things that we all care about. So with that, I will close, and I'm going to hand it over to two of my fantastic colleagues who are going to lead us in a panel discussion with some of our elected officials who I think are joining us momentarily. We have Katie Bloom, who is CBPA's Political and Legislative Director, and we have Ezra Thrush, who is PennFuture's Senior Director of Government Affairs. And they're going to give you a little intro and introduce our panelists. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm gonna kick it over to Ezra because one of our panelists is having a technical difficulty getting on.
Thanks, Katie. I'll just go ahead and get started and talk about what we do and what we're looking forward to here. Katie, if you have the first question for me, or we'll go through the questions here in a minute, we can pose that to Paul. Katie, you might have a better introduction for Paul as well, since you work closely with him. But we're looking very closely. We're very excited to work together with the new legislators. It's been exciting to be in Harrisburg the last 3 days here. Paul, I didn't get a chance to run into yet, but I've run into many of the new members that are working in Harrisburg now the last few days. Legislators already, newly elected legislators, representatives-elect are already in Harrisburg going through their trainings. And I think they just wrapped up training. And it sounds like they're not going to come back until the first day of the new General Assembly, which is January 3rd, which is really exciting. But really exciting. We're feeling really hopeful. I think Katie and I are going to be able to get some good work done this next year. For folks who don't know, Katie and I are like two peas in a pod, yin to the yang. So I work as a full-time lobbyist for PennFuture in Harrisburg, and Katie, of course, is the Conservation Voters Political Legislative Director, and we work as a tag team oftentimes, and we make sure we keep in touch with everybody in the building at all times. And we're looking forward to bringing some good progress next year. There are a couple things that we're looking forward to, maybe expanding our alternative energy portfolio standards, pushing more for clean energy, more for energy efficiency and renewable energy in Pennsylvania, strengthening RGGI, trying to push more for recurring permanent revenue for watershed protection. Those are just a few things that we're looking forward to with Governor-elect Shapiro in a new majority that's pro-environment. We're really looking forward to that. Katie, I don't know if you want to take from here, and I know we have another member joining us here, so flip it back over to you for a bit.
Excuse my cough. Pardon. So we are really excited. We have one more panelist who should be joining us hopefully soon. There's a lot of things going on with new legislator orientation and other things happening in Harrisburg, and actually some voting that has been happening today in both the House and Senate. So I am super excited to introduce newly re-elected Pennsylvania State Senator Katie Muth from Chester, parts of Montgomery and Berks County as well. And actually nested in the senator's district, we also have newly elected state representative, Paul Friel, who was also there, sort of in northern Chester County, who has just spent some time going through orientation. We do hope to also have State Representative Sarah Innamorato joining us. She did have some timing with some other items this evening. We do hope that she'll be able to join us though. So welcome, Senator and Representative-elect. We are so happy to have you.
Well, thank you for inviting me over here. And I just did get back from Harrisburg. I spent the last 3 days there in a drinking from the fire hose, trying to figure out what to do next. And it was pretty exciting on the floor today, I think, too, with a lot going on as that one race was called today to really cement our legislative majority. So, you know, it was exciting times.
Yeah. So to get started, we have some questions and both of you get to answer these. Senator Muth, the biggest thing is with these election results and it looks like we have 102 in the House at least, and we know that it's going to be not an environmental majority in the Senate, but with some shifts in this, how do you feel these election results can translate to good or even just better environmental policy in the coming 2-year session cycle?
I just want to make sure that you can hear me okay before I proceed. Okay, good. Thank you for having me. That's a great call. I think I really don't want the Senate to be the graveyard for good bills that come over from the House now that they have a majority, but we don't have a single moderate left in the Republican Party in the Senate. So it will be very interesting to see how environmental bills or any bill of quality coming over from the House is if they ever run it out of committee. I think it will definitely take the administration pushing for those environmental efforts, which I remain hopeful that soon to be Governor Shapiro will take that initiative and not just make it an initiative, but make it a priority to get some of these basic low-hanging fruit community public health protections into place so that people can live healthier lives and we can work on battling the climate crisis that's impacting Pennsylvania and beyond.
Paul, I know you're just learning, but do you have any thoughts or hopes after getting some training the last couple of days?
I certainly have hopes that with a majority that, you know, I think in terms of what we could pass that goes from the House, you can certainly pass and make known your priorities, right? And I think there's got to be some types of legislation that'll come out of the House majority now that it's Democrat controlled that will strengthen environmental regulations. Certainly something on Reggie at some point, clean water, clean air. I mean, it's important that we set our priorities. And then, yeah, I think it's going to be up to the governor's office to set priorities in budgeting time to say what gets across the finish line, what can get through the Senate, and in that process to put I think is going to, you know, require Josh Shapiro and his administration to put their foot down there.
Ezra?
Do you think that some of the environmental wins will present more opportunities for bipartisan work in the state legislature? You know, Senator Muth, you alluded to this a little bit, and I'll just give a quick anecdote. In the state budget that was passed the first week of July this year, we got almost $850+ million for environmental issues, and I'm wondering if that changes now that we're losing some of the moderates in the House, losing some of the moderates in the Senate. Are there opportunities you think for bipartisanship? I don't know if Senator Muth, if you had any other thoughts you wanted to add to that. I know you had alluded to it, but anything else you wanted to add to that thought?
I mean, I guess I'll be the Debbie Downer and just be bluntly real here, is that you have to remember what was bipartisanly supported last month, which was a tax credit for fossil fuels. So the shared interest, it seems to be in Harrisburg, is that there is some massive loyalty to the industry. And so I am worried about that. And I hope that that is the last of all handouts to industry. as we have done nothing of any scale to renewable energy and incentivizing that. So I hope that with the new governor and a new House makeup, that there is some movement. We are one of the biggest polluters in this country, and so it's morally right to take action on this, and our failure to do so would be failing to serve the public and protect the public. So I think that it's really important that everyone on this call remain vigilant and holding elected officials accountable for making the best decisions for everyone that lives in our Commonwealth.
Thanks, Senator. And Paul, I know you're just starting out here, but I know that you've been knocking doors for quite some time. You were also a candidate in the last cycle, and I know that you've been out there doing the hard work, meeting with folks where they are. And I know that you just flipped a seat that used to be Republican control. So I'm wondering, have you had any conversations with Republican and independent neighbors and constituents now that you think there might be some common ground or consensus? Are there like shared values that, Democrats or progressives or folks who are more environmentally minded can share with maybe the Republicans and independents you've talked to, and you can keep that in mind when you get seated in January?
Yeah, so I think it's certainly a much easier conversation at the doors and with the general public, because I think that the polarization doesn't exist that exists in Harrisburg or other political wings, doesn't exist in the doors of your local neighborhood. When you're talking about, providing lead-free water in an aging infrastructure in a town or city, and we need to clean that up and provide budgeting to do that. That I think you can get bipartisan support for. I think when you're talking about, hey, we need to make sure that building in, credits or ways for our small farms and agriculture businesses to put up solar projects and make them affordable and sent there. There are small wins, certainly, I think, are going to be on the horizon that'll be supported by local municipalities, local people, and that'll certainly cross party lines. When it gets up to the fossil fuels that Senator Muth alluded to, and the bigger things, and how do we decarbonize our economy over time? And what are those things that will help us to decarbonize our economy over time? And what does that look like? And certainly anytime you can shut down something that's coal fired or coal ash, and those plants which have, not just enormous greenhouse gases that go out in the atmosphere, but also affect our water tables and pollute there. And then holding industry accountable to clean up, and when you're doing the fracking, you're doing wells and natural gas, there's really no post-closure well monitoring, and how do we hold folks and say, you need to account for the impact here and clean this up, because that is a form of subsidy if you're allowed to allow that to be kicked down the can down the road. So market forces, I think if we're smart about using market forces, and they had to properly price in the environmental impact and the cleanup and the post-well closures, and they had to price that into their pricing model, then all of a sudden that green energy looks a lot more attractive. So I think we got to be smart about how we propose that. I don't know how successful we'll be in terms of the bipartisan piece of that, but I think if we're proposing it like that, where we're talking about just making it fair, making you accountable for cleaning up your well, your space, and you price that into the market and then let the market and capitalism drive it, you're going to see that clean energy is going to be a lot more attractive. And, so I'm hopeful over time. And then, like I said, the budget priorities, when it gets down to budget time in June, and our administration saying, where the line in the sand is. Certainly, that's it.
I just wanted to bring in, Katie, unless you wanted to do the intro, but we were joined by Rep. Innamorato. Katie, I'll flip it over to you.
Yeah, Rep. Innamorato just got reelected in Allegheny County. Very excited about that too. And I do want to say thank you very much. I know you had a very packed evening, so thank you so much for being able to take a little bit of time with us. We're just talking about bipartisanship futures of what might be able to happen in the House. So if you have any thoughts on that.
I don't know. It's really hard I do like what Rep. Electrifiel was saying around like factoring the life cycle, like the cradle to grave of what it actually costs to, you know, pull fossil fuels out of the ground, and then what they do with the waste. And one of the things that, you know, has been on my legislative priority since I've been in the House is closing the hazardous waste loophole, and really using that frame of fairness, in saying that like this is waste that has potentially harmful constituents in it, and it should be treated the same as any other industrial waste from any other process when it comes to putting the ownership of the companies that are pulling this out of the ground, and they should be responsible for the manifest of where it ends up, how to track it, and making sure that it's disposed of in a safe way that isn't harming workers, it's not harming the communities long term, and it's not destroying our ecosystems once it is in its final place of disposal. And if the companies had to be responsible for that, which is extremely reasonable because we know, again, every other industry is responsible for it, then, you know, I think would see some parity. We'd see parity in industry, but we'd also see the cost benefit and the economic benefit of looking at kind of green energy solutions. And the other one, I don't know if it's been brought up, is around energy efficiency and like building, like improving building envelopes and green buildings and things like that. And I don't know if you've touched on whole home repairs as a concept. I'm seeing heads nod, so I don't want to.
We didn't get there quite yet, Rep, if you want to walk us through it.
So again, the only reason it passed in this last budget cycle was because it was bipartisan. And so in the House side, and then Senator Saval on the Senate side worked on a bill called whole home repairs. And it really came from an expressed need from members of our community who were low to moderate income, who couldn't afford basic home repairs or weatherization. And we have a very old housing stock here in Pennsylvania. A lot of that's concentrated in our urban cores. And so, you know, being able to put $125 million towards remediating people's homes, removing health and safety hazards, but then also weatherizing those homes, we're going to see an increase in people's quality of life. We're going to see job creation, and then we're going to see overall reduction of energy use in our residential sector. And we were able to talk about that savings to our Republican counterparts, and they saw the value in it. We were able to talk about removing blight in communities and supporting them long term, and what our return on investment would be. And I think we can take a lot of these really good policies, and if we wear different frames, we can get that bipartisan support. And I think we saw that success in this last budget with that particular piece of legislation.
Thanks, Rep. And I just want to underscore that, like, that's hugely critical. I don't know if folks know, but next year we're likely to see an update to building codes come front center stage. Transportation issues are going to take front and center stage in the new General Assembly. Mm-hmm. So pushing for public transit and pushing for accessibility and equity, pushing for trying to work on transportation sector emissions and more climate and energy provisions in that world is going to take a big part of attention next year. And if folks don't know this, in Pennsylvania, the emissions are broken down kind of like 30% is about 33% is transportation sector. Another 33% is about the power generation sector. And about 33% of our emissions in Pennsylvania comes from buildings, actually. So Rep. Innamorato and Senator Saval and everybody else doing the work on buildings is really important. I just wanted to pivot to the next question here. For the panel, and Senator Muth, if you wouldn't mind kicking off with this answer, and then we'll work away the panel through the panel here. Why do you think the environment is such a controversial and partisan issue in the Pennsylvania legislature? It seems like it shouldn't be. It seems like clean air and clean water should be everybody's issue. There shouldn't be, stripes for this issue. The majority of Pennsylvanians believe in protecting the environment, and we've seen poll after poll, especially with the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative and taking climate action. Overwhelming majorities of Pennsylvanians agree with climate. Why is it such a challenge and a controversy in the Pennsylvania General Assembly?
Sure, that's a great question. It is a combination of corporate greed and profit-hungry people, as well as lack of campaign finance reform in Pennsylvania. And so those two combinations, those two things combined rather are deadly to democracy. And so we are one of the most heavily polluted states and big polluters ongoing. So we have a lot of waste from all of the industry that has come through Pennsylvania with coal, timber, all of the things. So I don't think at all the Republicans or independents disagree with us that we need clean air and clean water to live. Literally, I think that the people that represent districts that are more rural and even some in Philly and Pittsburgh, there is an underlying loyalty to donors. And those donors aren't always gas and oil companies. They're also the building trade unions that use these fossil fuel projects for jobs. And that's just the blunt reality of where we're at. And so, yes, we need economic sustainability, but it's almost framed as if economic sustainability and renewable energy cannot happen at the same time, which is an absolute falsehood. And so until there are stricter campaign finance reforms in Pennsylvania, eliminating pass-through PACs and dark money, people are bought and paid for ultimately by the gas and oil industry, not to mention our public pensions and union pensions are heavily invested in these companies themselves.
Thanks, Senator. Rep. Innamorato, I'm sure you have some thoughts on this. I think we've heard you talk with us before in the General Assembly.
Yeah, I would really like to underscore what Senator Muth said, in that it's always follow the money, follow the money. But I think we have such an opportunity here, and I think I was reading a New York Times article, and I think this comes up when we have this conversation, is we can't even convince people that we need to stay below 1.5 degrees warming. This is something that was Paris Climate Accord. All these countries came together, businesses came together, we signed it, we said, yes, we are gonna do everything within our power to stay below this mark, because we know the devastation that'll occur. Not only the devastation and the loss of human life and all of the other tragedy that will ensue, but the economic cost of the status quo, of increasing emissions and increasing global temperatures. And still yet we're debating globally on whether we are going to do that. In Allegheny County, our Chamber of Commerce, they put together a proposal and they said, oh, it's okay for our region if we don't meet those climate goals because of our economics. And to me, that's just, it's a lack of creativity. It's a lack of vision. It's a lack of political will to say we can have both. We can have jobs. We can have green, sustainable manufacturing. We can have strong economies. We can build up communities that have been left behind. It is just going to take electing the right leaders and putting the right people in leadership positions to make it happen. We have it. We have the energy. We have public opinions on our side. Businesses are on our side. It's just going to take the leaders in place to make sure that they can marshal those resources and direct them to a sustainable future that brings all of us along.
Thanks, Sarah.
I'm gonna pivot to our last question, but I'm gonna kick it off with Paul, just on the interest of time here, because I know it has been a week. So I would love to hear, starting with Paul, but from all three of you, what are the environmental priorities that you see in your district, and maybe even the state, but definitely your district, because I want to give a shout out to not only the field team that we have on the call who have done so much work, but frankly, I noticed looking at the attendees, we have so many members and volunteers here who get activated on the ground in districts, just like the three of yours. So I would love to hear, starting with Paul, what is sort of the environmental issue in your district and something that you're looking forward to working on in the coming session, if you can?
Sure. I mean, I'll really quickly. And full disclosure, I owned an environmental testing firm that all I did was air emissions testing in industry. So with EPA, DEP compliance. So I do have some thoughts on the sort of larger economic issues around that world. Certainly global climate change is there, but every place I test, I'm testing for heavy metals and deoxyfurans and PM, and there's a lot more at risk with local communities, and certainly in disproportionately, communities of color and poorer communities that are impacted long before the climate goes to 1.5 degrees Celsius. We have every single day a lot of stuff coming out of there that we really need to take some action on. But what we can do locally, for example, I'm a school board president, and we just did a whole replacement of every single light bulb and everything in every single facility. We replaced our chillers. We had this year about a 30% increase in energy cost on electricity bills, the cost per kilowatt hour, and we paid $0 more because we had changed everything out to LED. We changed our chillers out to more efficient. So you talk about that. We did our building envelope. So we're talking some about the investments that we can make locally, and we can make an economic, we can show an ROI to our communities. And it's every single school district in the state of Pennsylvania. It's every municipal building. It's everything that we spend public dollars on, taxpayer dollars on, and you can get an ROI on it. We should be doing that. We need to invest in these facilities. We need to invest in our schools anyway. We can set the example, and it's better for our taxpayers if we do so, and we can kind of lead that way. So I think in that way, we can change the conversation and say, not only is this good environmental policy, not only is this healthier for our community, it is cheaper in the long run. It'll lower our energy costs, and there's a return on investment. And I think that's sort of the approach I think we can take.
Rep. Innamorato?
Sure. I'm lucky to sit on the Climate Change Advisory Committee for the state, which helps write the climate action plan once every 3 years. And we know that we have a very climate resilient state and a water rich state, actually. But one of the things, the way that climate change is going to manifest itself is an increased rainfall. And so what I see representing like the Allegheny River is a lot of flooding, a lot of landslides. So, that's an issue that we work on, not only on the prevention side, but then how to invest and make that infrastructure more resilient for our communities. We also have air quality issue, right? Our region has some of the worst air quality in the nation. And that air quality, that negative air quality, is concentrated in environmental justice communities. So they're disproportionately Black and lower income areas, which means that we have higher rates of asthma. So there's a lot of like public health issues that we have to deal with in our region and that require attention and investment. And then I think, the great debate on hydrogen is really taking place in the Ohio River Valley, which is Pittsburgh and Allegheny County is like a big part of that conversation. And again, just going back to my previous point, is we have a way to do that correctly. Hydrogen, when applied to specific industries, can be a game changer for decarbonizing hard to decarbonize industries like steelmaking and concrete. But it's all going to be a matter of how we get to that hydrogen. So we can think creatively about how we invest in a green hydrogen facility. And it's just going to take, again, it's going to take investment, it's going to take political will, and it's going to take someone who's willing to like create that buy-in from all the parties involved, because we can have good paying union jobs, we can have a clean environment, and we can have a sustainable economy that is thinking about the future and innovation, and not just the status quo.
Senator Muth, how about you? Local issues. There's so many issues, I know, but a local issue.
Yeah, so I think one of them, to just go with Sarah's line of thought here, is that, you know, my district is very vigilant in looking to where fossil fuel expansion is going to be put through Chester County. We have many pipelines in Chester County. The hydrogen hub conversation is not isolated to the Southwest. There's great discussion of it being an additional hub in the Southeast. And if you are doing that, you have more pipelines to build to transport, you know, hydrogen or carbon capture. And so making sure that we are looking to local government for those warning signs to make sure that the public can participate into the feedback process is important. I think my district certainly is begging for community solar in areas where it's restricted by HOAs. They certainly are looking for incentives to do upgrades to residential and commercial for energy efficiency and green energy appliances. And I think that those should be incentivized just like the fossil fuel industry gets handouts. So there is no tax credit for people who, there is a federal one, it's small relative to the cost of an electric vehicle, but there should be a state one as well. And expanding charging stations and access is really important. I wouldn't be sitting here as a newly elected senator again if I didn't advocate for those things. So I think that these, I'm not in a bright blue district, and Republicans, independents, and Democrats agree that we need to be doing more to both make energy efficiency a reality, clean up the pollution that exists, and ending more pollution, as well as creating a plan for when the weather, extreme weather attacks our areas, on knowing where it's going to hit, because flooding, hurricanes, and tornadoes, I don't know if Republicans realize this, but Mother Nature doesn't care where you live when these types of incidents happen. So it's only a matter of time until more damage is done to people living in our Commonwealth that could have been prevented. So those are certainly priorities, and watching out for additional infrastructure that would lock in 30 more years of fossil fuel polluting in Pennsylvania.
Yeah. We are over the quote unquote panelist time, and we have so many questions from our audience. So excited, so much conversation in the chat. We are not going to get to all of the audience questions at all, and I know that our panelists also might need to scoot if they need to scoot, but we will send some follow-up communications with answers to the best of our ability for the questions that we don't get to. But I do want to lead off with a great one while we still have our panelists, since we are getting close to time here. Are there any executive actions you would like to see from Governor-elect Shapiro?
I'll say it. I want a mandate for anybody who doesn't have drinking water from industry to immediately have their drinking water replaced. This is the United States of America, and Pennsylvania has many impacted residents that literally can't turn on a faucet and get clean drinking water to cook, eat, and bathe with. It's disgraceful. That should be priority number one. It's a quality. It's something you need to literally be alive. And I would argue then I mean, I'm not an attorney, so full disclosure, but I would also close the hazardous waste loophole via executive action, because these, the constituents that are harmful, that's in frac waste from the cradle to grave hole process, are equally, if not just as bad as nuclear energy waste. The science is there. It's just the loopholes in the state law. So the feds don't want to take action. Certainly there's enough evidence of harm that warrants executive action.
Any other thoughts? Thank you, Senator Muth. You like covered that for everyone. Excuse me. I'm going to go on to another question here. Some questions have already been answered in the chat. I also want to say somebody said they hoped that Senator Muth wasn't driving. She is parked. Don't worry, she's not driving. I saw that pop up in the chat as well. There are some
I'm next to a Pottery Barn parking lot here, so they sell non-toxic bedding for who cares.
There is really just a question with Democratic Pennsylvania House members. We kind of talked about this a little bit, but I wasn't sure if anyone wanted to expand. If Democratic Pennsylvania House members pass legislation that promises to get good things done, do we really think the Senate will obstruct that much? I'm kind of paraphrasing a question here. Do we think that they might see the writing on the wall after this cycle and there might be some hope?
I guess I would say that unless the public is being made aware of the graveyard in the Senate, there's no CNN for Harrisburg. What happens in the state capitol is often not watched by the public. It's not, we try really hard to share as much information, but we will have to advocate for the lack of action of the majority party in the Senate failing to do their job and rally around that. So it will be a constant loud defense to call out their inability to actually legislate and serve the public.
Yeah. What does anyone think about this election, meaning more support for RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, once it gets through the court and doing something with RGGI investments? Maybe in a bipartisan way. Do we think there might be some more support now?
I guess it was my understanding that the soon-to-be governor didn't really support the thought of RGGI going through the regulatory process and thought the legislature should. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that.
Yeah. The next question, actually for Molly, who is still on. There were some critical areas that were reached. What kind of critical areas were you referencing when you talked about the election stuff?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think, I think we have some great representation from some of those key areas that we did a lot of work on this call. When trying to win a statewide election in Pennsylvania, we have 67 counties here, as you all know. That's a lot of counties and a lot of voters to talk to. And so we had to narrow that down somehow. And we looked at where voters were going to be most receptive to hearing our message. And we ended up doing kind of two different types of work. A lot of our work talking to voters directly on the doors was done in southeastern Pennsylvania in districts like Representative-elect Friel's and like Senator Muth's. We were there knocking doors and talking to voters in the turf there. Because that ended up being where so many of those battleground seats were, those seats that were going to be incredibly close and where we had opportunities to flip them from being held by an anti-environment legislator to a pro-environmental legislator. There were also some great opportunities that some of our partners engaged in out in Representative Innamorado's neck of the woods, particularly Representative-elect Mandy Steele and Arvind Venkat are two of our new champions from out in Western Pennsylvania. And those were two really competitive seats that a lot of our partners did some great work in. I also want to highlight one other program that we did, which I think was particularly exciting. We ran a pretty significant program talking to climate-focused voters across the state. So this was statewide, it wasn't targeted geographically. And we developed a list, a model of that predicted voters who were maybe less likely to vote in a midterm election. Maybe they voted every presidential election, but they were less consistent voters. But who we thought climate and climate issues would be motivating for them. We knew that this election was going to come down to turnout and making sure that we got as many of our voters to the polls as possible. And so we ended up running a layered digital and mail program to I believe about 100,000 voters across the state who may not have turned out otherwise in this important election if we hadn't talked to them, and if we hadn't talked to them specifically about climate issues. So that's a little bit more insight into the folks we talked about. Our phone program also had a much bigger reach than our door program. We were calling voters in Lebanon County and Monroe County and Delaware County, and all across the state. Erie, we were up in Erie, I think. We were texting voters all across the state. And in fact, we had volunteers helping us text voters from outside of the state. We had volunteers from across the country helping out. And so it was really an all hands on deck effort.
Yes, and we are right on the nose at time. Again, if we did not get to your question, we will be sending out follow-up. This has been a super active chat. So thank you all so much for the Q&A. And thank you so much to Senator Muth, Representative Innamorato, and Representative-elect Friel. We really appreciate your time. We are looking forward to a new legislative session and hopefully some action and some solid bipartisan action going forward as well with some of these election results. So thank you all so much for your time. And thank you to everybody who attended this webinar tonight. The volunteering and communications you have with us at PennFuture and Conservation Voters means so much. So thank you all so much and have a good night.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Good night.
Amazing getting us elected. So thank you.
Thank you for running.